Kelechi was greedy, so greedy that during the festival of sharing, he stole the sacred goat and ate it all alone. That night, he dreamed of meat, but when he woke, his teeth ached, his body craved grass, and he realized he was changing. By the festival morning, no one recognized him, not as a man, not as a goat. What happened to Kelechi will shock you. The first time Kelechi stole food from his neighbor's pot, he was only 7 years old. His mother had beaten him that day, not because he was hungry, but because he had eaten from 3 different pots in 3 different compounds before coming home to eat her own food. A boy with one belly does not need 4 meals, she had said, her voice sharp as broken glass. But Kelechi never learned. Now, at 32 years old, he was the wealthiest trader in Akomo village, yet the greediest man anyone had ever known. His barn overflowed with yams, while his neighbors' children licked empty plates. His clay pot held enough palm oil to last 3 seasons, but he would not give 1 drop to the widow next door, even when she begged. Every man for himself, Kelechi would say, his belly pressing against his wrapper like a drum. My hands worked for this. Why should lazy people enjoy what I suffered for? The village tolerated him because his father had been a good man. They tolerated him because they believed everyone deserved patience. They tolerated him because they did not know what else to do. Then came the season of the great festival. Every 7 years, Akomo village celebrated the festival of sharing, when the ancestors were believed to walk among the living. The whole village would gather at sunset, and the eldest woman would slaughter a white goat. Not just any goat, but the sacred festival goat chosen from birth and fed with prayers and special herbs. The meat was never for one person, it was for everyone. The living would eat their portions, and the rest would be burned as an offering to the ancestors, so that the dead could feast with the living. This was the old way. This was the sacred way. Kelechi's mouth watered every time he thought about that goat. So much meat, he whispered to himself one evening, watching the goat graze near the shrine. Its white coat shimmered in the fading sunlight, and its eyes were calm, almost knowing. All that meat wasted on dead people who cannot even taste it, wasted on villagers who do not appreciate good food. His stomach rumbled, not from hunger, but from desire. What Kelechi did not know was that the goat was watching him too. 3 nights before the festival, Kelechi could not sleep. He tossed on his bamboo mat, his mind churning with images of roasted meat, crispy skin, and the smell of pepper and bitter leaf. He imagined biting into the tender flesh, juices running down his chin, his belly finally, truly full. Just this once, he told himself, just this one time I will eat like a king. When the moon hung low and the village was deep in sleep, Kelechi arose from his mat. His heart pounded as he crept through the darkness, his feet making no sound on the dusty path. The goat was tied near the shrine, a simple rope around its neck. It did not struggle when he untied it. It did not bleat when he led it away. It simply followed him, its hoofs clicking softly on the ground, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Kelechi's hands trembled as he led the goat into the forest behind his compound. His breathing came fast and shallow. Sweat dripped from his forehead, despite the cool night air. "Forgive me, ancestors," he muttered, though he did not mean it, but a man must eat. He raised the knife, and the goat's eyes met his, calm, knowing, almost pitying. Then he struck. Blood steamed in the cool night air. Kelechi worked quickly, his hands slippery with blood and his heart hammering in his chest like a talking drum. He skinned the goat with the skill of a man who had slaughtered many animals, but never one like this. Never one that belonged to the ancestors. "It is just meat," he whispered to himself, trying to calm the strange feeling crawling up his spine. "Just meat and bone, nothing more." But his hands would not stop shaking. He built a small fire behind his compound, hidden by tall elephant grass. The flames leaped at the darkness, casting dancing shadows on his face. As the meat roasted, the smell filled the air, rich, mouth-watering, almost too perfect. His stomach growled so loudly it seemed to echo in the silent night. When the first piece was ready, Kelechi could not wait. He tore into it with his teeth, barely chewing, swallowing chunks of hot meat that burned his throat. Fat coated his lips. He ate and ate and ate, his eyes rolling back in his head with pleasure. "This is what the ancestors have been keeping from us," he said between mouthfuls, his voice thick with greed. This is what they did not want us to taste. He ate the legs, he ate the ribs, he ate the head, cracking the skull to suck out the brain. He ate until his belly swelled like a pregnant woman's. He ate until he could barely breathe. He ate until the sun began to rise and only bones remained. Then he buried the bones deep in the forest, covered the fire with sand, and stumbled back to his compound. His body was heavy, his mind foggy with satisfaction. He collapsed on his mat and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. He did not hear the elders discovering the empty rope at the shrine. He did not hear their cries of horror. He did not hear them calling his name. When Kelechi awoke, the sun was high and hot. His mouth tasted strange, bitter and grassy, like he had been chewing leaves. His stomach, which should have been full and satisfied, cramped with a dull ache. Too much food, he muttered, rubbing his belly. I ate too quickly. But the taste in his mouth would not go away. He went to the stream to drink, but the water did not help. The bitter, grassy taste clung to his tongue, grew stronger, became almost pleasant. He found himself staring at the green plants growing along the stream bank, and his mouth watered. What is wrong with me? He whispered. When he returned to the village square, everyone was gathered. The elders stood in the center, their faces grave. The oldest woman, Mama Nkiruka, held the empty rope in her wrinkled hands. The sacred goat is gone, she announced, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. Someone has stolen the ancestors' portion. Someone has committed the greatest sacrilege. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. People looked at each other with suspicious eyes. Children clutched their mothers' wrappers. Mama Nkiruka raised her hand for silence. Her eyes swept across the crowd, and for one terrible moment, Kelechi felt sure she was looking directly at him, seeing straight into his guilty soul. Whoever did this, she said slowly, her voice like distant thunder, will reveal themselves. The ancestors always collect what is owed to them. Always. Kelechi swallowed hard. The grassy taste in his mouth grew stronger and his teeth began to ache, a deep throbbing pain that made his eyes water. That night, lying on his mat, he felt the first itch on his forehead. When he touched the spot, it felt hard, like bone pushing through skin.
Kelechi did not sleep that night. He lay on his mat, his fingers pressing against the two hard bumps on his forehead. They were small, barely noticeable, but they were there, real, growing, and they hurt, a deep, relentless ache that made his skull throb with every heartbeat. It is nothing, he told himself in the darkness. A rash, an insect bite, it will go away. But he did not believe his own words. When morning came, Kelechi looked at the food in his house, smoked fish, dried pepper, gari, leftover stew, and his stomach turned. The very smell of it made him want to vomit. His mouth watered instead for something else, something he could not name. He wandered outside, drawn by a pull he could not explain. His feet carried him toward the back of his compound, where grass grew thick and green. Without thinking, he knelt down and reached for a handful of the grass. What am I doing? He whispered, staring at the green blades in his palm. But his mouth was already watering. His hands were already lifting the grass toward his lips. The first bite was like lightning, sweet, fresh, satisfying in a way that made his whole body shudder with relief. He chewed, and the grassy taste that had haunted him for 2 days finally made sense. This was what he needed. This was what his body craved. He ate until his belly was full, until the grass around him was torn and scattered. When he finally stopped, breathing heavily, he looked down at his hands and saw they were trembling. No, he said aloud. No, no, no. But his body had already begun to change, and there was no stopping it now. Over the next 3 days, Kelechi's world fell apart. His teeth grew longer, harder, pushing against his lips until they bled. His gums ached constantly, and he found himself grinding his teeth against anything hard, wood, stone, his own knuckles. The bumps on his forehead grew larger, breaking through his skin, curving upward like horns, he whispered, staring at his reflection in a bowl of water. He tried to cover them with a cloth wrapped around his head, but they kept growing. Soon, they pushed through the cloth itself. His eyes, once round and human, began to change shape. They stretched wider at the sides, and light, especially sunlight, became painful. He found himself squinting even in the shade, seeking darkness, seeking shelter. And the hunger, oh, the hunger. He could no longer eat human food. The sight of cooked meat made him sick. He craved grass, leaves, bark from trees. He would wake in the middle of the night and find himself on his hands and knees in his compound, tearing at grass with teeth that no longer felt like his own. People began to notice. "Have you seen Kelechi?" asked the woman at the market. "He looks strange." "Strange how?" another replied. "His eyes, his teeth, and he walks differently now, like his legs do not bend the right way." The children were the cruelest. They would follow him through the village, pointing and laughing. "Kelechi walks like a goat. Kelechi eats like a goat. Maybe Kelechi is a goat." He tried to chase them away, but his legs felt wrong, stiff at the knees, and his voice came out strangled, almost like a bleat. On the 5th day, Kelechi went to see the village herbalist, an ancient man named Dibia Okuro, who lived at the edge of the forest. "Help me," he begged, falling to his knees. The horns on his head were now as long as his fingers, curving back from his forehead. "Something is wrong with me. I am changing." Dibia Okoro stared at him for a long moment, his old eyes seeing things Kelechi could not hide. Then he shook his head slowly. "You came too late," the old man said. "The change is already too far along." "What change? What is happening to me?" The herbalist pointed at Kelechi's head, at his teeth, at his strangely bent legs. "You are becoming what you consumed," he said simply. "Tell me, Kelechi, what did you eat that you should not have eaten?" Kelechi's mouth got dry, his heart hammered in his chest. I do not know what you mean," he lied. Dibia Okoro's expression did not change. "Then I cannot help you. Only truth can break this curse. But you, Kelechi, have never been a man who speaks truth." Kelechi stumbled out of the herbalist's hut, his mind spinning, his body betraying him with every step. The sun burned his eyes, his legs bent at the wrong angles, and deep in his chest, where his human heart should beat, he felt something else, something animal, something wild, something that wanted to run to the nearest patch of grass and eat until the world made sense. Tomorrow was the 7th day. Tomorrow was the festival of sharing, and tomorrow, Kelechi knew something terrible was going to happen. If you are glued to this story, wondering what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss how this ends. The morning of the festival of sharing arrived with a sky so clear it looked like polished blue stone. Kelechi had not slept. He sat in the corner of his compound, his back pressed against the mud wall, his knees drawn to his chest. His legs no longer bent like human legs. The joints had reversed, bending backward like a goat's. His fingers had grown thick and hard, the nails darkening into something that looked almost like hooves. The horns on his head were now as long as his forearms, curving back in smooth, terrible arcs. He had given up trying to hide them. What was the point? Everyone knew, everyone whispered, everyone stared. "Maybe it will stop," he whispered to himself, but his voice came out wrong, half human, half bleat. Maybe after today it will stop. But he knew it would not stop. From the village square, he could hear the drums beginning. Boom, boom, boom. The festival was starting. He could hear voices singing, feet dancing, the sound of celebration. They had found another goat, not a sacred one, but a goat nonetheless, and the festival would go on. Kelechi's stomach cramped with hunger, not for festival food, not for roasted meat or pounded yam. He was hungry for grass, for leaves, for the bark of young trees. He tried to stand, but his legs, those strange bent legs, would not support him properly. He fell forward onto his hands, and for the first time, it felt natural. It felt right to walk on all fours. "No," he gasped, forcing himself upright. "I am still a man. I am still Kelechi. I am still..." The pain hit him like a hammer. It started in his spine, a cracking, tearing sensation that dropped him to the ground. He screamed, but the sound came out as a high-pitched bleat that echoed across his compound. His back arched impossibly, bones rearranging themselves with wet, horrible sounds. His skin began to itch everywhere at once. He clawed at his arms and saw white hair pushing through, short at first, then longer, spreading like fire across his body. "Help!" he tried to shout. "Somebody help me!" But no one came. The villagers were at the festival. They were dancing and singing and celebrating. They were sharing food and honoring the ancestors. They were doing what Kelechi had refused to do. And he was alone. His face began to stretch. His nose and mouth pushed forward, bones grinding and reshaping into a muzzle. His teeth, those long grinding teeth, pushed further from his gums. His eyes moved to the sides of his head, and suddenly he could see behind him. The world stretched wide and strange. He tried to crawl toward the village, toward help, toward anything human. But his arms, no, his front legs buckled, and he fell onto his side in the dust. The transformation was complete. Where Kelechi the man had been, there now stood a goat. Not a full goat, not quite. His eyes still held a flicker of human awareness. His bleats still tried to form words. But his body was that of a goat, white-coated, horned, with hooves where hands and feet had been. He tried to stand, and this time his 4 legs worked perfectly. He stood in his compound, a goat with a man's cursed soul, and he knew with absolute certainty that this was forever.
From the village square, he heard Mama Nkiruka's voice rise above the drums. Let us thank the ancestors for their mercy. Let us share this meal together as we have always done, as we will always do. The celebration continued without him. Kelechi the goat bleated once, a sound of pure anguish, and stumbled toward the village square. He appeared at the edge of the square just as the feast was beginning. The villagers fell silent one by one as they saw him, a white goat stumbling on uncertain legs with human eyes that held tears. Children pointed, women gasped, men stood up from their mats, their hands tightening around their cups. Mama Nkiruka stepped forward, her face unreadable. She walked slowly toward the goat, and the crowd parted to let her pass. She stopped a few feet away and looked down at the creature with ancient, knowing eyes. Kelechi, she said softly. It was not a question. The goat, Kelechi, bleated and nodded his head. Tears streamed from his wide-set eyes. You ate the festival goat alone, Kelechi. You took what was meant for all and devoured it in darkness. You thought the ancestors would not notice. You thought there would be no price. Kelechi bleated again, a desperate sound that might have been sorry, or might have been help, or might have been both. Mama Nkiruka shook her head slowly. The goat did not curse you, Kelechi. Your greed did. When you ate the sacred goat alone, you became what you consumed. You are now what you valued most, a belly full of meat with nothing else left. The elders gathered behind her, their faces grave. One of them spoke. Is there no cure, no medicine? Mama Nkiruka was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, the ancestors are not cruel, but they are just. Kelechi must learn what he refused to learn as a man. Humility, sharing, and the truth that no one can live well alone. She turned to Kelechi the goat. You will live among the goats now. You will eat grass and sleep in the pen. You will be cared for as all our animals are cared for. But you will not be a man again until you truly understand what it means to be part of a community. Kelechi bleated, a sound of desperation that broke the hearts of even those who hated him. But the elders were firm. This was his punishment. This was his lesson. That day, as the festival continued, Kelechi was led to the goat pen at the edge of the village. He was given grass to eat and water to drink. The other goats sniffed him curiously, then accepted him as one of their own. And Kelechi, who had once been the wealthiest man in Akomo village, spent his first night as a goat, alone, but finally learning what it meant to have nothing and need everything.
Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Kelechi lived among the goats, eating when they ate, sleeping when they slept. At first, his human mind screamed against it, the humiliation, the disgrace, the absolute horror of his new existence. He would lie in the pen at night, listening to the sounds of the village beyond the fence, and he would weep. But goats cannot cry human tears for long, and slowly, without him noticing, something began to change inside him. He learned the rhythm of the goat pen. He learned which goats were gentle and which were bullies. He learned to share the feeding trough, to wait his turn, to not push the smaller goats aside. When he did push them aside out of old habits, the lead ram would butt him hard, and Kelechi would stumble back, humbled. Share, the pen seemed to say. There is enough for everyone if you share. The children still came to stare at him sometimes, but their laughter had changed. Now they brought him special treats, sweet potato peels, fresh banana leaves, and they would talk to him as if he could understand. Mama says you are learning a lesson, a little girl named Adaize told him one afternoon, pushing a handful of grass through the fence. She says maybe one day you will be human again. Would you like that, Kelechi goat? Kelechi bleated softly and took the grass from her hand, chewing slowly. He did not push. He did not grab. He simply accepted what was offered. The little girl smiled. You are kinder now than you were before, she said, and skipped away. Those words stayed with him, echoing in the part of his mind that was still human. The rains came and went. The dry season arrived, harsh and unforgiving. During those hard months, food became scarce, even for the humans, and the goats' portions grew smaller. One evening, the boy who brought the goats their food arrived with only half a bucket of grain. The goats crowded around him, bleating desperately, pushing and shoving. In the chaos, the bucket tipped, and grain spilled into the dust. The goats descended on it like a storm. Kelechi's old instincts roared to life. Grab it all, eat it all, take it before others do. His legs moved without thought, pushing him into the center of the frenzy. But then he saw her. A young female goat, thin and weak from nursing her kid, stood at the edge of the crowd. She was too timid to fight for her share, and the others pushed her back every time she tried. Her kid bleated behind her, hungry and small. Kelechi stopped. He stood in the middle of the feeding frenzy, grain all around him, and he remembered something. He remembered a widow who had come to his door years ago, begging for palm oil for her sick child. He had turned her away. He remembered how her eyes looked, exactly like this mother goat's eyes, desperate, defeated, hungry. Without understanding why,
Kelechi stepped back from the grain. He walked to where the mother goat stood and bleated softly to her. Then he lowered his head and used his horns to push some of the scattered grain toward her. The mother goat looked at him with surprised eyes, then quickly ate. Her kid joined her, and together they filled their bellies with the grain Kelechi had given up. When they were done, there was nothing left for him. His stomach was empty. He would go to sleep hungry. But for the first time in months, perhaps for the first time in his entire life, Kelechi felt something strange and warm spreading through his chest. He felt good. And that night, while he slept hungry in the goat's pen, he dreamt he was human again. The next morning, Mama Nkiruko came to the goat's pen. She was old now, walking with a stick, but her eyes were still sharp. She stood at the fence and looked at Kelechi for a long time. "The boy told me what you did yesterday," she said quietly. "He said you gave up your food for the mother goat and her kid." Kelechi bleated softly, lowering his head. "You are learning," Mama Nkiruko continued. "Slowly, yes, but you are learning." She paused and then added, "The question is, have you learned enough?" She reached through the fence and placed her wrinkled hand on Kelechi's head, between his horns. Her touch was warm, almost hot, and Kelechi felt something stir deep inside him, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "Kelechi," she said, her voice like a prayer, "do you understand now? Do you understand that a full belly means nothing if your heart is empty? Do you understand that what we give is more valuable than what we take?" Kelechi wanted to speak, to tell her yes, he understood. He understood that all his wealth, all his possessions, all his greed had brought him nothing but loneliness. He understood that the villagers, even in their poverty, were richer than he had ever been because they had each other. He understood that sharing was not losing, it was multiplying. But he was a goat, and goats cannot speak human words. So he did only one thing he could. He pressed his head against her hand and bleated, a sound that was somehow both animal and human, both regret and hope. Mama Nkiruko smiled, her eyes wet with tears. "Then it is time," she whispered. She began to chant. Old words, ancient words, words that existed before the village, before the farms, before the first human ever looked at a goat and saw something other than food. The transformation happened slowly this time. It was not violent like before, not painful or terrible. It was gentle, like waking from a long sleep. Kelechi felt his body begin to shift, bones rearranging, muscles reforming. The white hair receded, the horns shrank, his legs straightened, his face pulled back into human shape. When it was over, he knelt in the dust of the goat's pen, naked, thin, weak, but human again. The goats around him bleated softly, almost in farewell. Mama Nkiruka opened the gate and helped him to his feet. The villagers had gathered, watching in silence. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They simply watched as a man who had been lost returned to them. "You have learnt your lesson," Mama Nkiruka said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "But do not forget it, Kelechi. The ancestors are watching, always watching. And if you return to your old ways, they will not be so merciful a second time." Kelechi nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Tears streamed down his face, human tears this time, salt and sorrow and gratitude all mixed together. "What will you do now?" Mama Nkiruka asked. Kelechi looked at the village square, at the people who had watched his downfall and his transformation. He thought of his compound, empty and quiet. He thought of his barns, full of yams he had never shared. "I will share," he said quietly. "Everything I have, I will share it all." And he did. That evening, Kelechi opened his barns and invited the entire village. He brought out yams and palm oil, dried fish and pepper. He distributed his wealth with trembling hands, and with each person who received something, he felt lighter, as if he had been carrying a heavy load for years and was finally setting it down. The widow who he had once turned away came to him last. She stood before him, her eyes unsetting. "I am sorry," Kelechi said, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "We are all learning," she said simply. "Every day, we are all learning." Years passed. Kelechi never became wealthy again, but he never wanted to be. He walked like everyone else, ate like everyone else, shared like everyone else. He became known not as the greedy man, but as the man who learned. When the festival of sharing came around again 7 years later, Kelechi was the one who helped slaughter the sacred goat. And when the meat was distributed, he took only his portion, no more, no less, and he ate it with gratitude, surrounded by his community. The little girl, Adeze, now a young woman, sat beside him and smiled. "You are kinder now than you were before." She echoed words she had spoken years ago to a goat in a pen. Kelechi smiled back. "I had a good teacher," he replied, looking at the goat pen in the distance. The lesson was simple. Those who eat alone will live alone.
Those who share will never be hungry because they will always have each other. And in the goat's pen, the animals grazed peacefully, teaching the same lesson they had always taught, that the earth provides enough for everyone if only we are willing to share. The end. The value. Greed isolates us, but generosity connects us. What we hoard dies with us, but what we share lives forever in the hearts of others. The greatest wealth is not what we possess, but what we give away. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if it made you think differently about sharing and community, subscribe now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, we all have a little bit of Kelechi in us. The question is, what will we do about it? Subscribe now.